Thank you again to the Helpes for hosting us here. We're going to, Mirza Hashem, prepare ourselves now for Shavuos by trying to go through Halachot of Yom Tov. Halachot of Yom Tov is complicated, and there's all sorts of rules and exceptions to the rules, and then Gezeras Midrabanan that are exceptions to the exceptions, etc. So we'll try to go through it and try to explain the general rules of Halachot of Yom Tov, as well as address like the specific malachos that usually come up. And how practically how we deal with them, lighting fires, cooking, using hot water, all these types of things, and hopefully get some clarity on Halachot of Yom Tov. And if there's time, so then we'll try to address maybe some specific halachos as they come up with Shavuos of meat and milk and things like this. If there's time at the end. Okay. Do you have a chumash? Is there a chumash available? You have.
I'll try to find one.
I can maybe find it in the Kriya over here. If I can find it here for a second. I think that's it. It's the first day of Pesach. So we're looking here. This is Perek Yud Beis in Shmos. So one of the days that we lean on Yom Tov. Here it is. Okay, okay. Okay, no problem. Okay, so it says over here. So the pasuk says like this. I'd like to try to get a chumash from before. This is Shmos Perek Yud Beis pasuk Tez Zayin. So it's before this. Okay, so I'm not going to find it out. So but basically, the pasuk tells us like this. The pasuk says that kol malacha lo yaseh. You're not allowed to do any malacha on Yom Tov. Let's talk about the halachos of Yom Tov. But it says except kol asher. Anything that you need to do for every nefesh, every person. I really like to try to find the pasuk inside this because it says it out very explicitly. But we'll find this. Okay, so that's what the pasuk says. So based on this, we learn that two things. We learn that malacha on Yom Tov is aser. In other words, that we see that there's a malacha min haTorah that tells us that we're not allowed to do malacha on Yom Tov. But then we see that there's some sort of an exception to this. It says, however, except, which is always an exception in the Torah, es asher taseh l'kol nefesh, except for those things that you need to do for your nefesh. So those malachos you're allowed to do. So based on this is this concept in halacha and Yom Tov that the general rule of thumb that we have to start with is malacha is aser. We're not allowed, just like on Shabbos, we can't do anything on Yom Tov. One of my rebbeim, once a person I was close with in Pesach, he was the mashgiach of the Pesach yeshiva of Nosson Weissman. He still is. So he said to me once like this. He said we used to speak a lot in halacha, and he said there was a certain shaila that came up on Yom Tov, and he wasn't sure if he was what to do about it. And he said Hilchos Shabbos is difficult. He said Hilchos Yom Tov is gorshver, is very difficult. He said Hilchos Chol Hamoed is almost impossible. He said what's the idea? Is that, the more that's mutter, so then the harder it becomes. You know what Shabbos? You can't do anything, and that's fine. Everyone knows Hilchos Shabbos. As best as we know. We avoid doing any malacha. But what happens on Yom Tov, like we know certain things are mutter, we know that we see, but it gets very confusing. So hopefully we'll try to get to some clarity, through this. But the basic rule of thumb is like this. Basic idea is like this: that there's malacha is also. You have to assume you can't do anything on Yom Tov just like you can't on Shabbos, and that's an isur bin haTorah. Now it happens to be on Yom Tov. The difference is that there's no chiyuv misa. A person's b'chal Shabbos chas v'sham, so the chayiv misa. On Yom Tov, it's a lav, it's like a lo saseh, the person would get malchus, which wouldn't kill them, but it's still pretty severe. But as far as the malachos are concerned, we have to assume that if something is aser, if it does not fall into the exception of ochel nefesh, if it treated like it's Shabbos, it's aser just like it was on Shabbos. Now, what is this idea of ochel nefesh? The Torah tells us that there's an exception. Literally, it means for the eating of your nefesh, for the needs of your keeping yourself alive, for eating to keep you alive. Ochel nefesh. So Chazal understood from here. What it means is that any common needs that a person has, common needs for comfort or common pleasure, regular common needs that a person has on Yom Tov are permitted from this pasuk. Right? The malacha is asar on Yom Tov, lo saseh malacha, aches kol asher taseh l'chol nefesh. Those things that are those basic common needs that are exemplified in the pasuk by eating needs. that Chazal say it doesn't just mean eating; it expands to all these types of things, basic human needs. So all of those things, malacha for those things are mutter on Yom Tov. So that's the exception. But we're going to see that there's a lot of very specific parameters that are set onto that. We'll see, for example, trapping on Yom Tov is aser under all circumstances. But what does that mean? If a person has a need to eat something on Yom Tov and they would need to trap, so the parameters are very specific, which hopefully we'll try to get clear. But the basic idea is the basic common human needs. Especially pertaining to eating, but also pertaining to like lighting fires for warmth or for hot water for washing, and these basic things like we'll see tonight going through different malachos. Basic human needs are permitted on Yom Tov. And there's a concept which we're not going to get into all the technicals of it because all these things are very complicated. Like I said, there's a concept of mitoch, which tells us that it doesn't have to be once this malacha is permitted on Yom Tov for ochel nefesh. In other words, let's say like lighting a fire or cooking. So then we're going to see that in certain circumstances, or like carrying, let's say that you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov. So in certain circumstances, we're going to see it's going to be mutter, even if the need is not as urgent. Okay, we'll see. Now, however, there's a number of exceptions to this rule of ochel nefesh, and they're all learned from the pasuk. It says. I wish I had the pasuk in front of me. It says, "Taseh lecha," do for yourselves, is what it says in the pasuk. To do the malacha for yourselves. Taseh lecha. So Chazal learn from this word lecha. We learn a number of things, and these are all important restrictions, let's say, on this concept of ochel nefesh. First of all, there are certain things that are not considered to be necessary. Certain things that we'll see in a second. Certain things that are not considered to be necessary either because they could have been done before Shabbos or for other reasons. And those things are not going to fall under this exception of the standard exception of ochel nefesh. Furthermore, Chazal tell us lecha means it has to be something that is shaveh l'chol nefesh. It has to be something that is equal for all people, meaning something that only very wealthy people would do. For example, the Gemara says, burning incense or something like that. That's not permissible to do. Only something that is shaveh l'chol nefesh, something that all people, all the general masses need this type of thing. That is permissible. But something that's eino shaveh l'chol nefesh is not permissible. So I'll just tell you two examples of things that come up into this, which we'll talk about. One of them more tonight than the other one, but one of them is showering on Yom Tov, because it's very clear from the halacha, for the Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, etc., that heating water for washing your hands and your face, that is considered to be shaveh l'chol nefesh. But in the times of the Gemara, it was clear that showering one's whole body is not considered shaveh l'chol nefesh. It was considered to be something only an istanis, only a person who was very particular would do, and therefore it was not permitted to heat water in order to shower a whole body on Yom Tov. And we'll see what the halacha is nowadays. Different poskim address this. Another example they bring about this is smoking. Smoking is something that a person who does it, for them, it's like eating, it's like drinking, it's like a part of what they normally do. And you're allowed to light a fire for things that are permissible. And in fact, there are many poskim through the generations that permitted smoking on Yom Tov for this reason. However, nowadays more and more, the poskim are being more and more stringent about it, and they say that smoking is not something that's considered to be shaveh l'chol nefesh. There are people that do it, and even a large number of people who do it, but it's certainly not something that all people do, or that all people would find enjoyable to do, and therefore they question whether smoking is something that's permissible out there for this reason. But we'll get into some details about this as we go along, but just understand the concept. Number one is that it has to be shaveh l'chol nefesh. It has to be something that is generally used or generally done. Number two is lecha is only for people. You can't do malacha for animals on Yom Tov. In other words, we're going to see all sorts of things that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov that you can't do on Shabbos. Let's say like picking out the bones from meat, you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. But you would not be allowed to do that for a dog. If you wanted to, let your dog, eat something, but you're afraid about the bones, so you would not be allowed to pull out the bones on Yom Tov. You'd have to do it like we would do it on Shabbos.
So boar is mutter on Yom Tov?
Well, we'll see. In many situations, yes. But we'll get.
I always said it was, but
we'll get to it. Well, in some situations, yes, some no. We'll get to it. We'll get to it tonight. But I'm trying to set up first the rules, the general parameters, and then we're going to address a number of specific malachos that I just jotted down, and then we'll take whatever questions that come up. We'll talk about. We're hopefully going to get to lighting fires, cooking, peeling, kneading, and boder. Those are the 5 things that I got that I think cover. We'll get to fire, lighting fires, raising, lowering fires, cooking, peeling, kneading, and boder. the things we're going to hopefully get. Okay, so that has to be again for Shavuot L'chol Nefesh. It has to be only for people. And finally, the halacha is lacha has to only be for a Jewish person. A person is not allowed to do malacha for a non-Jew on Yom Tov, and it's very important, especially if you have somebody at home helping or something like that. You're not allowed to make them a cup of tea on Yom Tov. Like you would be allowed to do for a Jewish person, and it's just very, very important to remember that. And not only that, but I think I remember we addressed this once before. Because of this, there's a special gezeira that Chazal said that while let's say for a Shabbos meal you're allowed to invite a non-Jewish person for Shabbos. Let's say you have a coworker or somebody that you know, or let's say you have somebody who's helping at home and you want to invite them to eat at the Shabbos table. So it's mutter to do that. There's no halacha that says you can't have a non-Jewish person at your Shabbos table. However, you're not allowed to invite a non-Jew for Yom Tov. If they come uninvited or they invite themselves, you're allowed to let them come, and then you're allowed to let them eat the food that you made. However, because you're not allowed to do malacha for a non-Jew, so you're not allowed to invite a non-Jew. It's a gzera that you may, and because you're going to be preparing your Yom Tov meal, and I have to prepare for 7 people. One of those people you're not allowed to do malacha for. So if you're going to be making a piece of schnitzel that's extra for that person, or you're making a dessert or whatever it is that you're doing. So then that's also to do. So that's just the gzera. So again, if it comes up, which it does sometimes. When we were living in America, there was a person who was going through gerus who used to be in the community a lot, live in the community. I'm saying used to come to our house a lot. So the halacha is a lot of people learn this as they're going through gerus is that they're allowed to invite themselves, they're allowed to go to families that they have a connection to and say, are you available for me to come for these meals? And they're allowed to say yes and have them over and have them be a normal part of the meal and everything, but they just have to make sure that they can't do malacha for that person. So that's just something to keep in mind. There's a riddle. What are you allowed to say? One statement that you're allowed to say on Shabbos that you're not allowed to say on Yom Tov. And that's to say to a non-Jew, do you want to come over to eat? Because on Shabbos you're allowed to invite them, and Yom Tov you're not allowed to. Okay. Anyway, that's it. So those are the exceptions to the rules. I want to now get into these exceptions. Again, exception number 1 being if it's not really considered necessary, it doesn't enter into the category of ochel nefesh. Number 2. It's something that's not considered shavuot l'chol nefesh, not considered to be useful for everybody, and then only for people and animals and Jews. We're not going to get into more than that. Okay, now so one of the things that the post can get into, and this is really what makes a lot of Hilchos Yom Tov very complicated, is the following. That they impose the following exceptions. And it's all complicated, why it is the case, and it's based on a machlokas, etc. I don't want to get into all of the background, but I just want to try to lay out what the rules are. And it comes out like this. Number 1, something that could have been done from before Yom Tov to the same effect, right? You could have done it exactly the same way before Yom Tov, and it wouldn't be any less good on Yom Tov. So that is not considered to be fully necessary on Yom Tov. And therefore, many times that will have to be done with a shinui. You'll be allowed to do that. You'll have to do it with a shira. I'll give one example, which is not necessarily a common example, but they say like this: cooking in general, everything that you cook is just is better when you make it fresh, and therefore, in general, cooking is mutar on Yom Tov. The post gives 2 examples of things that are considered to be not any bit worse if you make them erev Yom Tov. Jello, that's one example. They say if you make jello made the day before is just as good as that day. And fruit like compote, what do you call that? Cooked fruit. Say cooked fruit. If anything, it gets better. If it sits longer, that's not better when it's fresh. So that's like 2 examples that say we're going to get into, like I said, each of these specific malachos of cooking, peeling, lighting fires, kneading, border, all these things to get into. But just to give you an idea, when it comes to cooking, these are the only 2 examples that the poskim cite as specific examples that I'm aware of that you can't just cook that regularly on Yom Tov, because it could have been cooked on erev Yom Tov to the exact same effect, and therefore you're allowed to make it, but you have to do it in an opposite way, like put the pot on the fire and then put the ingredients into the pot or something like that. Cut the food directly into the pot while it's on the fire. Do something in an unusual way, and you're not the normal way that you put it together. Okay, that's one example. Okay, another thing is, so that's again, exception number 1 is something that could have been done before Yom Tov, but we'll see, when it comes to cooking, it's not so applicable. When it comes to other things, it is, which we'll get to shortly. Number 2 is if it's something that is normally done on a large scale, like sifting flour or harvesting, picking fruits and things like that, right? Picking fruits, let's say, or sifting, those are normally things that a person doesn't just pick one fruit at a time. Most picking that's done is harvesting. And most sifting that's done is not just done at home, but it's done on a large scale, not just for the amount of flour that a person is using now. So those types of malachos may not be done at all on Yom Tov. In other words, not that they could be done, but done with a shinoi, but the type of malacha that is normally done on a large scale, in general, again, there's exceptions to this also, like we'll see, but in general, that can't be done at all on Yom Tov. So while, let's say, when it comes to borer, you're allowed to use a slotted spoon on Yom Tov, which we'll see soon. You're allowed to use a slotted spoon to serve salad, on Yom Tov, which many folks would say you can't on Shabbos, or even on Shabbos. It could be you could, but let's say or straining soup. Let's say it's a better example. Let's say straining soup, but you can't do on Shabbos. You can't let's say hold the pot of the soup lid. Let's say you've got a chicken soup and you've got different things in there, and you want to pour off the broth and keep the things separately. You guys are going to know what I'm talking about. So you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to hold the soup lid, the pot open a little bit and pour off the soup. But let's say that's something a person could do, as opposed to sifting flour. As opposed to a person, let's say you need to sift flour. Again, most folks will say Allah Ma'is if you've got fresh flour that you've bought nowadays, with the hechsher of proper flour that you don't really need to sift halachically, but a lot of people do anyway. We do anyway at home. But it happened one time that we had to bake something. Not we. My wife had to bake something on a large scale. I asked the Shiloh. That was my problem. And we asked for advice, and he said that the Ikra dinner person does not need to sift if they're getting fresh. Fresh.
The regular flour that you buy at the Makol any of that, like you don't necessarily.
I'm talking about a sealed package.
I think I found a bug once.
Right, no, a lot of people have not. No, so that's why he said Ikra that you don't have to. Again, from a sealed, not sitting for a very long time, open, but from you buy a sealed package of flour, a kosher, actually, some Ikra that you do not need to sit it. I don't want to say because I don't know this. I don't know well enough.
You don't need the pre-sifted vacuum pack. I think is the question.
No, that's a different story.
Right.
That you don't have to.
What others are besides the paper package? Is there an
okay, I don't want to get into. I don't know the different packages. You can ask my wife whatever it was that he said we didn't need to sift. But anyway, let's just say so sifting flour. Let's say you would need to. Let's say you had flour that was sitting open or sitting for a long time, where you would need to sift it. Because eggs can fall in, etc. So then you would not be allowed to sift flour on them, for example. Okay. Okay. Now, number 3, and this is an important one. And not as much on Shavuot as it is on Pesach or Sukkot when you're dealing at the beginning when you have the Yom Tov with Chol Hamoed and lots of cooking and stuff going on. But still, very important to be aware of that. But cooking can only be done for Yom Tov itself. You're not allowed to cook anything extra for after Yom Tov or something. So we'll see. There are ways that you can. We'll see. The ways that you're able to do it. But in general, the halacha is that any malacha that's being done for ochel nefesh, that means ochel nefesh for Chag, for Yom Tov, right? So whereas the poskim say, let's say you're allowed to wash dishes in hot water on Yom Tov, because that's considered to be a basic need to be able to have your dishes clean and to have water available to do that. So you're allowed to wash dishes in hot water, but you would not be allowed to wash your dishes in hot water if you're not using them anymore on Yom Tov, right? Because then, well, first of all, you wouldn't be able to wash your dishes at all. That's in general, hachana, the halachas of preparation, preparing for after Shabbos or after Yom Tov apply on Yom Tov just the same. But here we're talking about doing malacha. So let's just say if you're cooking something, so you can't say, let's say you're making cookies. You're baking cookies Yom Tov morning to have, as dessert and to have available Yom Tov afternoon for people to snack on. You realize you didn't have enough and so you're baking cookies. So you say, oh, you know what, my kid has a birthday party coming up this week, so I'm just going to bake some extra cookies. That's also to do because you're doing now malacha on Yom Tov for afterwards. Okay. That's the general rule. You can only do for Yom Tov itself. Okay, but there is an idea called ribui b'shiurim, where I'm not doing extra malacha. We'll see the few rules that have to apply. But I mean, let's say, what does this mean? Let's say I'm cooking for a Yom Tov day meal. Okay, it's Yom Tov morning. You wake up, you daven, now you're ready to start getting ready for your meal. It's going to be a few hours till your husband wakes up from sleeping, Shavuot night, whatever it is. So you're going to make a whole chicken. Let's just say, right? Or you're going to make a whole lasagna, whatever it is. You're going to make whatever. So when you say, wait a second, we never eat a whole lasagna at a meal, right? We eat a third of a lasagna. We never eat a whole chicken at a meal. So what does that mean? I have to cut my chicken into a third and put only a third of the chicken in, or make a third of a recipe. So the halacha is as follows, okay? You are allowed to make more than you know you're going to need for Yom Tov under the following circumstances, okay? If you're making, Okay, so it has three rules. Let's say there's three rules for this that apply. Number one is it has to be that there's no extra malacha taking place. No extra malacha, meaning putting in a whole chicken is only one malacha, right? I'm putting the whole chicken in and I'm turning on the fire, let's say, or like extending the fire, whatever it is, and I'm baking that whole chicken. Baking a whole cake or baking a whole kugel, making a whole kugel, that's only one malacha, right? I'm putting the whole thing in at one time. So that's mutter to do, okay? If with the other rules that we're going to get to. Number two is you can't do any more specific, not only malacha, but tircha, any specific extra activity for the stuff that is not for Yom Tov. Now, what does that mean? Let's say you're talking about making a potato kugel. So to make a potato kugel, to make a recipe in a pan, even though you know there's going to be leftover, but this is the recipe that you make, so then you're allowed to make it in that size. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to guess in recipes and start, you understand what I'm saying? Let's make that clear. I want to make that clear. Even though you know, like I said, that lasagna, you have a recipe for a lasagna in a certain size, so even though you know you're not going to finish that lasagna, you're allowed to make that whole recipe for that. But I'm talking about making now a bigger lasagna than you know you're going to need. Even bigger. In other words, they're making a larger recipe. You're doubling your cake recipe because you want to make. You know what I'm saying? In other words, not just that you're finishing out a recipe that you have. So let's say something like potato kugel. You want to make extra potato kugels for to have for the week or for whatever it is. So you wouldn't be allowed to do that because you have to peel extra potatoes. Even though you're going to put the whole kugel in at once, again, you're making a bigger recipe. As when it comes to cake, you're allowed to. You would be allowed to bake a larger cake than you needed, right? Now, let's say on Yom Tov you would only eat this size cake, but you want to double the recipe because you want to have more available for you afterwards. So there's no specific extra malacha and no specific extra tircha involved. For the extra cake, you're just kneading a bigger dough or mixing a bigger batter and then pouring it into a bigger pan or pouring it into two pans, but then putting it in at one time. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? So let's say baking a bigger cake or a bigger cake recipe, as opposed to more cookies, right? Because forming more cookies that you're not going to make on Yom Tov, or frying more schnitzel, or peeling more potatoes, or breading more schnitzel, or stuffing more cabbage. These are all examples that are brought down in the different farm. You can't make extra stuffed cabbage. There's no malacha there at all. I say again, you're going to put them all into one pot and put the pot on the fire at once. But since you have to stuff each cabbage individually, so again, one recipe you're allowed to make, even though you know there's going to be leftovers, but you wouldn't be allowed to make more and more than you you're going to use. Okay, so that's rule number one. Rule number two. Rule number three.
Sorry, I don't quite get the difference between one and two.
Well, because we'll see certain things. Let's say like peeling potatoes on Yom Tov is. Well, let's say that's not a good example because it's let's say making cookies. Let's say making cookies, or battering things. Let's say putting all different things in a batter. Even if you're not going to fry each one individually, you're going to make a whole pan, let's say, of baked schnitzel, in the oven. But each one needs to be battered individually. So that's a case where there's no malacha involved in battering. You're allowed to put a piece of chicken and move it around in the and you're baking it in one time. But that extra tircha that you're doing, that extra activity that you're doing, right? You're forming those extra cookies. Peeling potatoes, I think, is if it's in the both categories, because peeling is only mutter if it's mutter for ochel nefesh. If you're peeling something for after Yom Tov, then you're not allowed to do that. Okay. Finally, number three is you're not allowed to say that you're doing this for after Yom Tov. In other words, even though it's mutter to make a bigger cake or make a bigger challah, let's say challah would be another example. Let's say to make larger challahs than you're going to need for Yom Tov, that's what you'd be allowed to do. But to braid extra challahs or to braid extra rolls that you're not going to use on Yom Tov, that you wouldn't be allowed to do. Any extra specific tircha that you're doing. Okay. Now, finally, even in a situation when you're allowed to do it, like the extra cake batter or the whole chicken or whatever it is, you're not allowed to say that you're doing it for after Yom Tov. You're not allowed to say like, it's great that I'm cooking this whole chicken because now you'll have chicken sandwiches for work, for this whole week, from the leftovers. That you shouldn't say, because just saying it makes it look like you're doing that malacha for after Yom Tov, which you're not allowed to do. Okay, again, just to be clear, we're only talking here about malacha. And adding onto malacha. But anyway, there's a halacha of hachana, a halacha general on Shabbos and Yom Tov. You're not allowed to do preparatory things like washing dishes even in cold water or setting the table Again, it's not so nogea this year. It's nogea on Shabbos this year. The truth is, right? This year Shabbos, you have to be very careful this year. On Shabbos going into Yontif, there's never a heter to do anything for Yontif on Shabbos, right? We just had on Pesach the other way around, that we went from Yontif into Shabbos. So there we make an Erev Tafshilin, and then we're allowed to do Malacha for Yontif into Shabbos. There's no Erev Tafshilin in this direction because Shabbos is Shabbos. The whole idea of Erev Tafshilin is that because Yontif is on a lower level than Shabbos, so Chazal say, according to one opinion, Min HaTorah, you would be allowed to, you can't do Yontif for Chol Moed because that's a lower level. You can't do Yontif for Chol because that's a lower level. But Yontif for Shabbos, so Min HaTorah you would be allowed to. But Chazal said you can't. But Erev Tafshilin says you can. That's according to one opinion. That's the dynamic.
So you don't make an Erev Tafshilin if you're just going to cook on Yontif for Yontif?
Well, but anything that you can't do anything then on Yontif for Shabbos. In other words, you can't set the table. You can't light candles.
No, I mean
can't.
after Shabbos, Shabbos has passed.
In which week are you talking about? A Shabbos going into Yontif like now in Shavuot?
Yeah, Shabbos is over.
Oh, so that's
now Yontif.
so that's what we're talking about now. That's what we're talking about right now. So on Shabbos itself you can't do anything. No Erev Tafshilin. No. Again, on Shabbos. What we had on Pesach was Yontif. By the last days of Pesach, we had Yontif going into Shabbos. So that's what an Erev Tafshilin works for. An Erev Tafshilin allows you to work on Yontif or prepare on Yontif for Shabbos. And even if a person thinks that they're cooked and they've done everything and they've taken care of everything, we still tell them to make an Erev Tafshilin because you can't even light candles, and then you're stuck because you can't light candles on Shabbos and you can't light candles on Yontif for Shabbos. So if you without an Erev Tafshilin, you can't even light Shabbos candles. So everyone has to make an Erev Tafshilin, on Yontif, going into Shabbos. However, Shabbos and Yontif, you can't do anything. So you can't not only Malacha you can't do, and Erev Tafshilin doesn't help, but you can't do any preparatory things at all. You can't wash the dishes after the Shabbos day meal. You can't.
Can you take the food out of the refrigerator so at least it's room temperature?
No. You can't do anything. No. You can't do anything that is for
What about that whole,
Yontif.
if you're taking it out for your kids to have some?
No,
some
you can. No,
and
that's
then
not
you
there.
just leave it out.
No, that's fine. If you're taking it out for a legitimate purpose, then you can. If you're taking it out for your kids to eat, you don't have to put it back. That's fine. You know what I mean?
Even if you know that you're kind of giving them some kind of, because
if you're taking it out to feed them now, even though it's convenient for you to feed them now because it lets you take it out, that's fine. But if they tell you no, mommy, I don't want, you say no, take, and they say okay, they don't want, you can't. That I would think Hashem would know that there's something fishy there. Just from what I've read about him. So. So that's the idea. But so you have to be careful this year for Yontif. You can't do anything. Certainly can't get your Shabbos Yontif candles ready or anything. You can't do anything. You just have to sit and wait through all Benish Pashos. Sit, enjoy the last few minutes of Shabbos, going into Shavuos, and then as soon as Shabbos is over, so then you can start getting ready.
Wait, normally I eat at 11 o'clock. Sorry.
Yeah, people eat
saying
late.
no, I'm
it's
saying
late,
because of in England we could only eat at
of course,
11,
that's
15,
not much
11:30.
Yeah, it's very late. Shavuos very late.
It's
Yeah.
not so bad.
We have no cooking service because of technology. You can't cook.
Right.
Okay, so let's say you need to heat your food up. It's going to be
It's
12
really
o'clock.
cold a lot.
Yeah, you have to have something that
You're
takes doesn't take very long to heat up on a hot plate.
Yeah, you need a hot plate or something. You need
Oh,
something.
no, okay. We have, but I'm just
You
saying.
need to make foods which doesn't take long to heat up.
Yeah. Or we do cold things. Like for sure, we do bagels that night.
Yeah, schnitzel doesn't take long.
It's also 10 o'clock at night. One
They eat and they go where?
Do you have one of those plug-in
Should we
hobs?
close the video? Okay, so you're getting lots of good your Shavuos menu eaters in the background. Okay. Okay, so that's the idea. Again, so we just covered right now the first idea that it has to be considered necessary. Again, things that could have been done before with the same effect, things that are usually done en masse, they're on a large scale, and now we're saying things that have to be done only for Yontif itself. The exceptions being if you're cooking, one malacha, no extra tircha, and you don't say that it's for after Yontif. Okay. Now I want to go and try to address a few specific malachas, a few specific areas of malacha, and we'll try to apply these rules to it. I'm just saying what makes it complicated is that within each specific malacha there are sometimes specific zeras midrabanan that come into play, which just makes it more complicated. Like that's what this Rav was saying. On Shabbos, everything is pretty clear. The rules of each malacha are across the board, but over here, because for all different reasons, everything's yontif, so the different things have different exceptions. So let's just go one by one. Now let's start with fire, using a fire. So first of all, we have to understand what are you allowed to light a fire for? So you're only allowed to light a fire for a legitimate yontif need. Something you need for yontif, either for warmth or for light, or for yontif candles. But the poskim even speak about a yahrzeit candle. If a person has a yahrzeit on yontif, a lot of the poskim say that you should not light a fire for that because it's not like it's not a yontif need. It's a nice thing to do. They say lights that are like for the kavod of the shul are mutter, things like that are permissible to do. For the same reason that yontif candles are mutter, because they add elegance to the room, even though they're not adding light anymore nowadays. But lighting a yahrzeit candle is a real shiloh of the poskim. Some poskim permit it, but others say that it's better not to. And it was actually this type of a shiloh that this Rav was talking about when I spoke to him. Rav Nathan Weissman was like, having to do with, I think the yontif candle went out, and the question was whether the person should have relit the yontif candle. And that was really the question. Like, is there really a necessity to do that? And that was like the question. Anyway, so that's the idea. So you're only allowed to light a fire. And now, in addition, you're not allowed to start a new fire. It's called, muli the ish. You're not allowed to begin a new fire. You're not allowed to light a match. You're not allowed to use a lighter just to spark a lighter. You're not allowed to turn on a light bulb, which is considered to be a fire when you make a filament glow. Right? So you're not allowed to start a new fire on Yontif. What you're allowed to do is to extend a pre-existing fire. Again, only for a legitimate Yontif need. So this is why people have usually a yahrzeit candle coming. You're going, especially this year. You have to have something going from Shabbos into Yontif, so you need a yahrzeit candle or a flame on the stove that's going all the time. That's that you could light from.
Sorry, a light that's on a dimmer. I've never asked this, but then my brain is because you're saying about the flame. If you can turn the flame up, right, on the stove, could you turn the dimmer on your light up because you're not lighting it? If you realise it's too dark in your room, or
it could be. I seem to remember that I know something about this, but I don't remember right now about this. That could be. I have to check it out. Let me double check that. Let me double check, and it could be that that's what if it's like a smooth, not like at different levels. Yeah, it could be that's what I have to double check. Don't do it unless I remember.
No, I'm just intrigued.
I think so. No, I think there's
stand there and do this because I can.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that. Right? So raising the flame on a stove. So that's also mutter to do. So let's say this year for Shabbos you're going to keep a flame on a stove. If you have an old-fashioned fire stove, so you'll have a stove flame on a low flame. Let's say going through Shabbos. But now when it comes to the Yontif night, you're going to want to heat up your soup. You're going to want to cook things or heat things up. And do things, you're going to want to raise the flame, or maybe light another flame and then use that flame. So the halacha is as follows: anytime you're raising the flame, which is the only reason you would be doing it for cooking, right? You need the fire to be hotter for cooking. It's mutter to raise it, and likewise to lower it. If you're lowering it in the course of cooking, I'm cooking the food and I see that the fire is too high and I want to turn it lower. That's also mutter to do because now that's for the purposes of cooking. The problem is when I'm finished cooking, I'm not allowed to turn the fire lower or out. According to most poskim, when I'm finished cooking, I'm not allowed to turn the fire lower. So the poskim say what you should do is keep your food cooking. One thing you're allowed to do if you have just water, you're allowed to let the water boil over and put out the fire and then turn off the gas. That you could do if you want to make that mess. I wouldn't recommend doing it with meatballs or stuffed cabbage or something. But with water, if you wanted to do that, you could let the water boil over, put out the fire, and then turn off the gas. But otherwise, you could keep the food there, after it's finished cooking, and say, now I want to keep the food warm, and then put the flame lower. But still, you can't turn the flame off. The Pilgrims can't turn the flame off from that stage. But to keep the flame low, to keep the food warm for a while, and then take it off. So that's a way that you're allowed to lower the flame. I'll just say that even this, there are many posts about this. I asked for Weiss last year, and he was lenient about this. But even this, there's some poskim. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach was machmir. He held that rather than lower the flame that you're currently on, you should rather light another flame lower and move it to have two flames going because there's no heter to extinguish. In other words, the heter is to light. you can only extinguish if it's necessary, but here it's not necessary because you could light another flame. So that Rav Moshe Feinstein held you did not have to do. Rav Moshe held that you're allowed to lower the flame in the course of cooking, and he held it was much to turn it all the way low. Yeah.
Is that the same with these plug-in hobs? Or not?
Electric, no. So electric, if
You have to leave one up and one down.
Electric. The problem is that most of them are not like dimmer. It's not like where it goes smoothly up and down. If it would be smooth, and I do think it's the same, but I want to just double check. But there's the problem. I'll tell you. I remember certain things here. I think the problem you can't lower it on one of those electric things. Because lowering it, you don't know when it's going to cause the fire to turn out. You don't know when it's going to cause it not to be glowing anymore. I really do think it's mutter to raise a dimmer on Yom Tov. I really do. I want to double check, but I really have it in my head. I think it is mutter to do. But I was going to say the same. But most electricity is not like that. Most like a crock pot or a hot plate, they usually have like setting 1, 2, 3, and in between it's off. So you have to know what if it's smooth or if it clicks. You know what I'm saying? If it clicks, then it's for sure a problem.
If it clicks, you can't, but if it's smooth, you can.
Let's say like on a fan where it clicks from 1 to 2 to 3,
Yeah, I know
then you
you
can't
mean,
do it.
but
Right?
if it's smooth, you can.
It's smooth. I think you could do that to make it hotter. I think you could. To make it cooler, I don't think you can. For this reason that you don't know when you're turning off the fire.
So like we had a electric stove in the safe, and it's smooth, like it's the same like a gas. But what do you mean by turning? I mean, it seems to me, if I'm supposed to do it, that it's a steady flow of electricity, just at different rates.
Which one are you talking about?
Electric stove. It doesn't like. It's not like an oven where like it heats
You're
up.
talking about like a coil, like
coil.
and it's smooth. And
Yeah,
it's
it's smooth, and I don't.
I think as long as it's glowing, you're allowed to.
Checking it and changing.
No, you're not. No, so I think like this. I think as
unless it's really hot.
no, so then you're not. I don't. I don't remember. I don't remember 100%. As long as it's glowing, you're allowed to make it hotter. But you're definitely not allowed to make it from not glowing to glowing because that's considered to be igniting a fire. You know what I mean?
Okay, they don't really glow unless you put them on high. Like, so we would never leave
So
them on
I don't
high.
remember. I know there's different things. I don't remember. Yeah.
They're just like they're hot.
So I don't know. I don't know if you're allowed to. I don't think you're allowed to do that if it's less than glowing because. Okay, I don't know.
Do the plug-in ones
I'm
get
not
red
sure.
hot? Here?
I'm not sure.
It doesn't go a colour. It's like a black tone.
Yeah,
Just gets
no,
hotter.
No, but no, you're talking about with a coil or you're talking about with a
Does it
flat
matter?
top?
She's talking
she-
about a
Does it
coil.
matter?
I
We
have
had
one
both.
that's-
Well, I don't know because you don't know what's going on under that metal plate. In other words,
it
the type with the
No,
coil,
it's
you can
Right.
see the coil, but on all these plates, the coils are inside. It's the same things. I don't know if you see it. Okay.
So are we talking about candle lighting with this as well?
Well, so candlelighting, let's just talk about that. So candlelighting this year, so we have to wait until Shabbos is out for sure, until today's Shabbos, whatever time you make Havdalah or whatever time you break Shabbos on a regular week. And then you say Baruch HaMavdil mein Kodesh LaKodesh, right? You're going out from Shabbos to Yantiv. Baruch HaMavdil mein Kodesh LaKodesh, and then you could start doing Malacha.
Do you have to wait for Havdalah?
You don't have to wait for Havdalah. No, because you're going to make Havdalah in Kiddush. Right, it's going to be a kiddush with Havdalah, right? It's a full Yak Nahaz, right? Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah's man. We get the full Yak Nahaz. You guys know this? I remember when I was in school, whenever Rabbi Whitkin, he asked in class, "Do you eat Yak Nahaz with a fork or a spoon?" That's what he says. Yak Nahaz is I don't know what the word acronym. Thank you for Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman, and that's the order that you make the brachos when you have. Kiddush and Shabbos and Havdalah and Shechianu. So the first thing we say is Yayin B'Rei Gafen. Then we say Kiddush for Yantif, right? We say Asher Kiddushaну, Asher Bacharbanu, all those things for Kiddush for Yantif. Then Yayin Kiddush Ner, we say Bori Morei Aish. We'll talk about what to do for setting up the fire. I'm right? We're going for Shabbos and Yantif. That's when we do this, yeah. Then you say Havdalah. We say Baruch HaMavdil Mein Kodesh LaKodesh. And then you say Shechianu. So that's Yak Nahaz. Yain Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. Yak Nahaz. Yud Kuf Nun He Zayin. So that's the order of things. We don't usually get it. The truth is, people from Chutz La'aretz just got it now on Pesach because their second day of Yontif was in Motzei Shabbos. Yeah.
In the fast day.
Oh no! They didn't have Havdalah that way. No, that's true. No, they didn't have Havdalah.
The first days of Shabbos into the Santa.
Oh, the first day, they're right. The first day they had. The second Seder they had Yak Nahaz, right? Nahom. The second Seder in Chutz La'aretz this year they did this, but we didn't get to do it. So now we get to do it, full thing. So I was going to make one point about this. One thing you should have prepared. There's a whole question about this. Oh, very good. Mama's talking about this right now. Okay, so this is interesting. So for Havdalah, you need a double candle, right? So that's also a question. So to light a candle, you can to light the candle. But what they talk about is, can you take two candles and put them together and then separate them? Because when you put them together, the flame gets bigger, and when you separate them, it becomes two smaller flames. So the Poskim says it's really preferable not to do that for Havdalah. They say two things. Either you should just make it on two candles, even though they're not touching, or what you could do, which is what I tried to remember to do, is they say, oh, exactly, right? We spoke about this before. So I don't know. When I was living in America, they used to sell something called a yak de huzel. Then I asked around, people never heard of it before. It must have been like a local thing. I think it was in Passaic. I don't know. Yak Nehuzel, which is not a special candle, whatever, it's a candle with 2 wicks, and that's it. And you just light that as one of your Yom Tov candles. So if you light one,
candle.
and then you have I'm sorry?
So you can't put
No,
it
because then you
out.
can't put it out. That's the problem. Is you light a
No,
Havdalah
so
candle, you have
take
to
a
let the whole
tea
thing
light,
burn down.
You take it out the silver container, you take another tea light and take a wick out of that one.
And you just make
and
2
you
wicks.
put it in the bottom
Exactly.
and stick it through, and then you light that tea light with the
Exactly.
2 wicks, and
Right.
that's fine.
And then
You
that's
can
it.
leave
So
there.
exactly, and then it just burns out. Because if you light a Havdalah candle, you can't put it out. You're not allowed to put out the Havdalah candle. You have to let the whole thing burn
So
down.
how do you-
Let that burn
so-
out, basically.
Yeah,
So
then
every-
what people do is they do 4 of the Yontif candles. One of their Yontif candles, they'll light the double wick. So that's what I do. I set up with my wife. We light with oil, so I just put 2 wicks into the little thing. I make the hole a little bit bigger, stick in 2 wicks, and then that's one of her Yontif candles. And we carefully carry it over to the table. You're allowed to carry an air on Yontif as long as it's not going to flicker out. We bring it over to the table. We make the bracha on it, then we carry it. I have to carry it very carefully. That's the story. Okay, but as you were saying about Yontif candles, so you can't get your candle set up until Yontif is over. You could, if you want to
You
set
can
up.
set them up. So you take an existing flame. You
Oh,
take
so
a
okay,
candle,
so yeah,
you
take
get
it. So now
you light
the truth is,
candles.
supposed to
How
say
do
like
you
this.
put that candle out?
So you don't. You should use a match or something that'll burn, like a long match or something like that to transfer the flame. What a lot of people do is they keep a yardstick candle by their candles, by their Havdalah candles, by their Shabbos candles,
Right,
Yom
so
Tov
it's like, so
candles.
you have a yard side candle.
Let's say right over there.
You
So you
light
take a long match, and with that match you light your candles,
And then
put that match down.
You
Don't blow it out. Just
I don't
set
blow.
it down.
Usually, what I do is walk quickly, kind of like a psiquation. I don't
But you
necessarily
shouldn't-
want to
you
walk
shouldn't do
quickly.
that.
It goes out
No,
on
you
its
shouldn't-
own. The
nothing
whole
you should
point
do
is
that.
to do, but no,
You
that
should
can't
put it
do
down on
that.
a piece of tinfoil. Just put it down
And
on a
it'll
piece
go
of
out?
tinfoil. Let it just go out on its own. It'll burn itself
And if
out.
it's a
Even a candle will put itself out if you have to use a candle.
Yeah.
So if
They
you
sell
use
these
a
special
candle,
things. They
like a
sell
Hanukkah
those silver lighters that just lets a little wick out, and then that wick burns out, and then you extend it again. But
Or
you
what
do that,
about
you
if
can
it's
use
like
a match.
no, the matches aren't going to make it for.
They won't make it.
matches.
Lay it down, it'll put itself out.
So I was saying, so if I take a Hanukkah candle and use it, can I just put it in the sink?
Yeah,
That's
just
not
not
what
with water, but it'll burn for a very long time. A Hanukkah candle.
Not if you lay it sideways, because it'll put itself out.
Okay.
Is that okay? I mean, you put it down, it's still lit.
You can light it. You can put it down in such a way that it's going to cause it to go out, but
If it's laying flat, they won't burn.
I don't know. Hanukkah candle I would think would burn for a very long time. I don't know. It's just like a match would just burn out, or you could
The match has to be.
I guess if you're lighting a lot of things, I hear if you're lighting a lot of.
If your match goes out in the middle of lighting candles,
You can relight it.
You can relight another match.
Yeah, it's
That's
relight.
true, too.
And do you light, let's say you light 6 candles Shabbos night, do you light the same
Yeah,
amount
native
for
also.
Yom
Yeah,
Tov?
you like the same one. Yeah, that's people like the same thing in native all the time.
Sorry, relating
Yeah.
back to the gas, just for one more. If you have a gas stove, I don't use it again because I'm nervous. I wouldn't, and it has some kind of a sensor on it where if it gets hot, a light comes on. You can't use it. I'm assuming.
Oh, explain. I'm not sure. I don't know what you mean.
Like an electric light, a little light comes on at the front to tell you not to touch the
It's gas. I thought it's gas. you said.
gas. Yeah.
How come you can't see that it's on then? We have a light also. That's the fire lights
No.
up. It's
Yeah, but at the front of the panel, I'm telling you.
No, I hear you saying it.
At
Yeah.
the front of the panel, it has.
Oh, it tells you like
it
which
has
ones are lit.
Which one is?
Because let's see if a pot there, you can't see the fire,
Yeah.
so it'll tell you. Here.
It's not
Interesting.
allowed. I'm assuming. I don't
If
use it.
you're gonna turn it up, it'll turn it on. Yeah, I guess you
If
wouldn't.
you turn it up, it goes on just once it's on.
If it gets hot, it
Not
alerts
just when you
you.
light it, it's when it actually gets hot.
Yeah, because normal people turn off the gas, so it's letting you know don't
That's
touch
the
it.
gas.
You're going to
Okay,
burn your
okay.
hand if you touch
Until
it.
it cools off.
Yeah, and then when it's cooled down, the light goes
I
off.
don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's.
Because
if
me turning the gas
it's
on,
gonna
I'm
make
turning
it,
on that
yeah,
light.
So that would be a problem if it's gonna.
Right.
If it's just gonna, I don't know. If it's gonna turn on later and it's not like directly, if it's not a psik ratio, if it's just gonna turn on at some point, then I think it may be mutter.
It is at some point.
Yeah,
I never
then
know
that's
when
mutter,
it's...
because grandma is mutter and yantif like that. Then I think that's mutter.
Oh.
That's mutter to do.
Wow,
I think it's mutter. Okay, so I want to go on just in terms of cooking. So as I cooking, I think we basically covered, right? So we understand that you're allowed to cook on yantiv except for compote and jello, which you have to cook in an unusual manner. But otherwise, like we said, basically all cooking, baking, anything like that you're cooking for yantiv. Again, making a whole recipe is mutter. You can't make more than you need. If you know you're going to need it later, unless you fulfill those criteria. Okay, so let's talk about a few other things now that we, other melachos that come up on Shabbos, that come up on yantiv also. Let's talk about borer. Now, borer is very complicated because, on Shabbos, it's just, on Shabbos it's also a little bit complicated, but let's just do a very, very brief review of borer on Shabbos. On Shabbos, we know that we're not allowed to, let's go back to cooking for a second. I apologize, because hot water is in cooking. So I'm going to just give it. It's possible to turn the air conditioner back on for a minute. I saw everyone was freezing, but maybe by now you're warmed up.
Or I could also.
It's cool outside.
Maybe open the window. So let's open this over here. That's fine. Okay. Thank you. So when it comes to cooking, that's excellent. Thank you. It'll be colder now than the air conditioner. Okay. When it comes to cooking. So aside from cooking food, the other thing that cooking is permissible for, which is considered to be shavuot chol nefesh, is cooking for washing. Cooking of washing. If it gets cold, you'll let me know. We'll close this for a few minutes. So cooking for washing is also permissible. Heating up water and even lighting a fire. In other words, again, not striking a new match, but in the olden days where they would need to light a fire in order to cook water, in order to wash. So all of that was permissible to do. But again, like we mentioned, that the halacha is clear from the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch that the type of washing that is considered to be shavuot l'chol nefesh is only panav yadav v'raglav. In those days, they used to walk around barefoot, so washing their feet was also very common. It doesn't really, we don't really do that now. But the poskim say panav yadav v'raglav just doesn't mean literally the face and the hands and the feet, but it means not washing the whole body. In other words, washing specific parts of the body that get dirty, over the course of the day. So that's considered to be shavuot l'chol nefesh, and that you're allowed to heat up water for. But to take a full shower, to bathe, to go into a bath, or to heat up a shower, heat up water for a shower, so that was clearly considered to be not shavuot l'chol nefesh. Now, just to explain what we're worried about, what we're dealing with over here. When you turn on the hot water, and we discuss this a lot of times just to make sure that it's 100% clear, when you turn on the hot water, you're cooking water in the boiler, right? Because every drop of hot water that comes out of the sink, of the faucet, or the shower, or the bathtub, so that's a drop of cold water that's going into my boiler, or to my dud shemesh, or whatever the way that my water gets heated, and then that water is getting cooked. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm cooking in order to wash, right? I'm not cooking the water that I'm washing with. It's like funny, right? In the olden days, they would cook the water and wash with that water. But now you have to cook other water in order to wash with your hot water, right? But the poskim say it works out the same way. So cooking in order to wash is permissible. So again, waking up in the morning, on Yantif, you want to wash your face, wash your hands, washing for Netilas Yadayim in the wintertime when you want to use hot water, so it's mutter to use hot water to wash. Any of these things. Okay, but now what about showering? Especially this year we have Shabbos going into Yantif. Shabbos there would be showers and going into Yantif. So it's a very big shiloh in the poskim. For all the generations since people started having indoor plumbing, it's been a big shiloh, and through the years the way I've even taught it has changed. I remember when I used to teach in high school in America, so I would teach that you're not allowed to shower fully, and you have to wash only one part of the body at a time, and you should be partially dressed, because that's what some poskim say. It's like a gzeira that you don't. This is what I taught for a long time actually, but recently. I spoke about it with Rav. He actually addressed this publicly in a shir last year, in his Yantif shir, and Rav Sheinberg also held this way. And basically, these are the poskim that say, this is what I started telling people in recent years, that nowadays it's considered to be shavuot l'chol nefesh. In other words, for a person, for people, for society, where it's generally accepted that people shower every day or every other day, most people will not go from, again, if that's the fact, that most people would not go, especially in the summertime, from an Erev Shabbos until a Sunday night without showering. Is that true? Is that not true?
Yes, definitely true.
Definitely true. Okay, fine. I don't know. It's fine. if I'd be in yeshiva, I would see somebody making that face and be like, "Cruising showers before Tuesday," But if you're in a society, or let's say especially in the summertime where it's hot over here, and it's like the norm that a person showers, every day or during a heat wave, shower more than once a day. So halacha maisa, like I said, I started telling people this definitely Revice holds this way, and others that it's mutter to shower on Yom Tov.
So you just have a normal shower?
Well, no, you can't have a normal shower. You can use the water normally, but you have to have a very abnormal shower because there's a problem of schita on Yom Tov, of squeezing liquid out of things, and that is not different on Yom Tov than on Shabbos in almost every respect. In other words, the malacha of, because schita comes from the malacha of dash, and dash is threshing, and dash is one of those malachas that is done on mass, it's done on a large scale, so schita there's no heter of schita on Yom Tov. In other words, just like on Shabbos that you can only squeeze lemons onto fish or salad, so on Yom Tov you can only squeeze lemon onto fish. You cannot squeeze lemon into tea on Yom Tov. The only difference is, on Shabbos you can't use a cheesecloth, right? You would not be allowed to wrap a lemon in a cheesecloth on Shabbos in order to keep the seeds and stuff out. On Yom Tov you could do that, right? Because if we get to Bora, we'll discuss that. That's the type of Bora you're allowed to do on Yom Tov. But schita, squeezing, is the same on Yom Tov and the same on Shabbos, and therefore you're not allowed to deal with your hair on Yom Tov. What does that mean? It means you're allowed to let your hair get wet, but you're not allowed to wash your hair with your hands. You're not allowed to use shampoo and knead it into your hair. You're not allowed to squeeze out your hair afterwards or dry your hair. You're allowed to wrap your hair in a towel and pad the towel against your hair, but you're not allowed to squeeze out your hair like you would normally do. And in the shower, you're not allowed to move your hands through your hair like you would normally do.
But you don't have to do it limb by limb, you say?
No, you don't have to do limb by limb. No, that's what I'm saying. That you're allowed to take a shower, a bath.
Why is that different between Shabbos and Shabbos?
Well, Shabbos. I mean, first of all, on Shabbos you're not allowed to heat up hot water even for your hands and face, right? Shabbos, the whole malacha of ochel nefesh doesn't apply. So
if you've got already stored hot water.
So that's Xera. That's Xera on Shabbos. A special Xera on Shabbos. Since you're not allowed to heat up water on Yom Tov, on Shabbos at all. So this is actually the whole Gemara tells the story of how this happened. It used to be that people would say, "Oh yeah, we heated this water from before Shabbos, and we're bathing now." And then used to be bathhouses that were open, and they were heating the water on Shabbos and saying, "Oh no, it was all heated from Erev Shabbos." And they made Xera not allowed to go into any sort of heated water, even if it was heated from Erev Shabbos, even if there's no fire anymore. That's Xera Midrabanan on Shabbos. You're not allowed to immerse fully in hot water. That's
about for kids.
For kids, if you had the water from before Shabbos, most of the time we say tzarchei tinok, the needs of a kid are like a chole, and a chole is allowed to wash in hot water on Shabbos. So if you need to do it for a kid, you're allowed to. But again, not turning on the water. Right? You can't turn on the hot water on Shabbos. Right? Turning on the hot. Yeah, let's say you're filling up a bathtub with cups from the urn or something like that, but you can't turn the hot water ever on Shabbos. But on Yom Tov, because cooking is mutter for ochel nefesh, so you're allowed to cook for washing.
Even if you already have hot water from the shemesh?
On Shabbos, you're saying? Yeah, because it's not the hot water that's the problem. It's the cold water that's going into the dud that's getting cooked. That's the problem. You know what I'm saying? That's the issue. When I was living in America, one of the people in the kollel where I was, they set up their house that there's a valve on their hot water boiler that they shut off before Shabbos. And they would use their hot water on Shabbos. You still have to be careful not to cook the cold water coming out. It's very complicated. But basically, with such a thing, you can do it, but then you have no hot water Matzah Shabbos at all because your boiler is empty. And then you have to fill your boiler and all that water has to get hot. But if you would set up such a thing, then you could do that.
Isn't the shemesh like a natural way of heating up?
Okay, it gets more complicated. But it's fine. The halacha is as follows. It's also Xera Midrabanan. No, it's a very good question. There's a huge discussion.
Right, about
100%, right. So the halacha is like this: you're allowed to cook in the sun, but you're not allowed to cook in something that was heated by the sun, right? Because again, it's also Xera Midrabanan. In other words, if I have a sheet of metal that I keep outside until it gets really, really hot, that I can crack an egg on it. So that's usher to do, because that's exactly the same as a sheet of metal that was heated by fire, and if I would do that, that's usher min haTorah. So to cook on something that was heated by the sun is usher midrabanan on Shabbos. So most can say that a dud shemesh falls into that category, because it's not the sun that's actually heating the water itself. It's the sun that's heating the mechanism that's powering the water through it that's ending up heating it. But it's not like sun onto the water. Like if you would take a cup of water and put it outside and it would get hot, you'd be allowed to do, but not the
You're allowed to use the water right after Shabbos because it's in, isn't it?
yeah, that's
Because it was heated on Shabbos by the sun.
no, that's
But
what they're anyway. I'm saying anyway, you can if you had a boiler that was cycling on and off on Shabbos, you would be like because there's no malacha done on that. You know, that's not a timer. It's mutter to do. You know, like if you had a chalent that was set to turn on Shabbos afternoon to be ready Motzei Shabbos, that would be mutter as long as it was set up for before Shabbos that way. So basically what we're saying, showering is mutter, especially this year, especially in Chutz La'aretz, where they've got a 2-day yantiv following Shabbos, right? 3 days. You know, those of you watching in Chutz La'aretz, be happy that the showering is mutter. Okay, so that's cooking. That's fire. That's just talk quickly about borer. And so basically the story is like this. Like we said before, if a malacha could have been done to the same effect, so then you're not allowed to do it on Yantif. So an example of that is when it comes to borer, let's say sorting cutlery. So if you had cutlery that was clean from before Yantif and was all mixed together, so then that you would not be able to sort normally on Yantif because that you really could have sorted before. But if you have cutlery, let's say Yantif night, you finish with your meal and you wash the dishes, and now you've got that cutlery and it's all jumbled together. So like on Shabbos, you would not be allowed to set the table Shabbos night for Yantif day, for Shabbos day. On Yantif, you could do that because that was not borer you could have done before Yantif. You needed that cutlery for Yantif, and then you used it. Now it's jumbled together, so you could sort the cutlery in order to make it easier to set the table or set the table in advance. Anything like that is mutter. It was mutter to do. Yeah.
Because sometimes it runs out that I run a dishwasher before Shabbos and it's clean, but then it hasn't been put away. So in order to put stuff in the dishwasher Friday night, I have to empty. So I can't sort. There's no way to sort if there's some.
No, you have to like scatter it. You have to scatter it like handful by handful. Like take a handful and scatter it on the counter.
And then I can sort it.
Well, once they're separated, so there's no borer.
You can't just
anymore.
do one by one.
No, one by one you can't do. On Yantif you could do that. On Yantif in a case where you could have sorted it before, like let's say here on Yantif you could do one by one. On Yantif you could take it one by one and say, oh this and I'll do there and this that you can do. But you can't do
the
that.
option is to put it in a mess in the drawer and make.
Yeah, that you can do, or scatter it. You could scatter it around and then pick it up. But many cases of borer that we have on Shabbos that we're not allowed to do are situations that on Yantif we are because they could not have been done before to the same effect. I wrote here a whole list of things. Sorting silverware that was washed on Yantif. Okay, peeling. So basically all peeling is mutter on Yantif. Do with the peeler. In other words, because peeling is a type of thing that it's much worse if you do it in advance. If you peel a cucumber the day before, peel an apple the day before, corn, and you use the apple core or something like that. All of those things they're much worse if you do it from before. So you're allowed to peel with a peeler under like usual, using a perforated spoon. Let's say according to everybody, even though like you said on Shabbos, many posts are makel. Anyway, but on Yantif for sure you could use a perforated spoon, and you could even use it and have kavana to let the soup drain out or something. Or like we said, you're allowed to, let's say on Shabbos, you would not be allowed to hold a matzah ball against the side of the pot and drain the soup from it and then give somebody a matzah ball. And you could do that. You could strain the soup, like we said. You could use a cheesecloth on the lemons. You're allowed to remove bones from meat or fish or anything along those lines. Basically, any of these types of things that you couldn't do from before Yantif because they're you're doing them while you're using the food, while you're involved with the food. So those things are mutter to do on Yantif. If a fly falls into your food, or dirt falls into food, so like we say on Shabbos, normally you have to take it out together with some of the liquid. So I'm sure on Yantiv it's machlokas. It's a bit complicated why it is the case, but some poskim say it's preferable to do the same thing on Yantiv. Others say you could take it out directly. The same machlokas applies when it comes to like fat in meat. Like you cut a piece of meat and there's like a ridge of fat. So like on Shabbos it'd be asur to cut it off, but on Yantiv, many poskim say that it's mutter to do that. Some say it's still better to take some meat with it. Like I said, that's machlokas. Okay. Any specific questions? Anything? We're approaching the hour.
Just with the shower, does it matter how can the water be as hot as you want?
Yeah. On Yantif, yeah, you're allowed to cook the water for it, and that's that's what you do.
So even the children, like you shouldn't really give them a shower until after Shabbos is out. We're saying.
Well, on Shabbos for sure you can't. On Shabbos for sure you can't use hot water for kids. For sure not.
Right.
On Yantif you can. On Yantif you can. I'm saying.
But in the summer here, the cold water is hot.
So that's mutter. For a kid to run the cold water warm like that, you could do. Yes. Just fully cold water.
Yeah.
That's mutter to do. Because that's water that's just like
It's
warm.
warm, right?
Yeah, it's not Yatzalat as well. That's not
No,
cooked.
it's just,
Yeah,
but it's
no,
not cold that
Right,
they're
no,
going
that's
to
mutter.
screech.
That's mutter to do.
Right.
It's mutter to use then.
Okay. And you can do that before Yom Tov for the children.
Yeah, just the same. Yeah, that's not preparing them. That's just
Cleaning.
washing them off for now. Yeah, they're clean right now. Okay, wonderful. Wonderful Yantif. Shabbat Kabbalah Satorah. Mitzvah Shem. With all of Klal Yisrael. Ki Ish Echad B'Lev Echad.